I've always said that fear feels different when you're alone in an RV, parked miles from anyone, with nothing but wind pressing against the windows and your own thoughts pacing the walls. I'd been on the road for almost 8 months by then, crossing the western states with no real destination, just the quiet rhythm of travel. My name's Aaron, 38, from northern Arizona. I'd left behind a construction job and a city that felt too loud, too fast, and too familiar. Out here, I thought I'd find peace. What I didn't realize was that sometimes peace disguises itself as silence, and silence can hide things you'll wish you never heard. That night, I parked near a place called Dry Creek Hollow, halfway between Ely, Nevada, and Great Basin National Park. It wasn't an official campground, just a gravel pull-off surrounded by cottonwoods, the kind of spot you find on apps that other travelers swear by. They said the stars were incredible, that it was quiet, that no one would bother you. They weren't wrong about that. I was the only one there when the sun went down, the only one for miles, and I remember feeling proud of that, like I'd earned solitude. The air was crisp, thin with autumn, and the smell of sagebrush drifted in every time I opened the door. I set up camp, leveled the RV, started a small fire in the pit someone had built, and heated up some canned chili. The sound of crickets came and went with the breeze. It was the kind of night that tricks you into lowering your guard, into thinking the world is still predictable. But around 10 p.m., as I sat by the fire watching the last embers fall into ash, I realized how dark it had gotten. Not just nighttime dark, but deep, velvety dark, the kind that erases the horizon. The stars were out, but the forest beyond the firelight was nothing but blackness. I tried turning on the lantern near my chair, but it flickered and died after a few seconds. The batteries were fine. I remember that detail clearly. The first sound came just after that, a dull, rhythmic thud, like something hitting wet ground. Then another. Then a dragging noise, soft but deliberate. It seemed to come from beyond the tree line, just past where my firelight stopped. I thought maybe it was a deer. I told myself it was. I even said it out loud, trying to hear confidence in my own voice. Probably a deer. But I didn't believe it. There's something about being in the middle of nowhere that changes how you interpret sound. Every noise has weight. Every echo feels directed at you. I turned off the fire to listen better, which was stupid in hindsight. The world went completely black, and suddenly I could hear everything, the shifting leaves, the soft hiss of the wind, and that slow, deliberate dragging again. It was coming closer. I moved back inside the RV, locking the door behind me. I told myself I was overreacting. People camp out here all the time. Maybe it was just a branch or an animal or the wind playing tricks. I sat on the couch, facing the door, and waited. The silence returned. For 10 minutes, nothing. My pulse slowed. I almost laughed at myself. Then something pressed against the side of the RV. It wasn't a knock. It was a push, a steady weight like a shoulder leaning into metal. The whole vehicle rocked once, slow and heavy. Then another push, this time harder. The cups in my sink rattled. I grabbed the flashlight from the counter, switched it on, and pointed it out the small kitchen window. The beam cut across the trees, but there was nothing there. No footprints in the dirt. No movement. Just silence. I thought maybe it was the wind again, but when I stepped closer, I noticed the window itself had smudges. 5 long streaks across the glass, like something had dragged its hand down, but not quite human. Too wide. I backed away. My mind scrambled for logic. Maybe someone had been out there earlier and I hadn't noticed. Maybe it was tree sap or condensation. Anything. But deep down, something in me had already crossed a line. You know that moment when your body decides for you that you're not safe anymore? My heart had reached that conclusion long before my thoughts did. I shut off all the lights and sat in the driver's seat, hands gripping the steering wheel. I was ready to leave, but then I remembered the narrow gravel road I'd come in on. One wrong turn in the dark and I'd end up in a ditch. I had to wait for enough calm to drive safely, or at least that's what I told myself. That's when I heard it again. This time it was on the roof, a slow crawling sound, The metal flexed under shifting weight, creaking softly as though something was moving, cautiously, trying not to make noise. I aimed the flashlight upward, but all I could see was glare off the windshield. I killed the beam and listened. The sound stopped, then a new one started. Tapping. Faint, right above the bed in the back. It was rhythmic. 3 taps, a pause, then 2 more. And then a whisper. I froze. It wasn't words, not clearly, but a tone, a low exhale that seemed to trace along the roof. I don't remember breathing. I don't remember thinking. I just remember slowly crawling into the back and pressing my ear against the ceiling, like some part of me wanted confirmation. The sound stopped the second I touched the roof. I stayed that way for a full minute, heart pounding so loud it filled the silence. Then, from somewhere outside, a voice called out. It sounded human. "Hey, you all right in there?" I stumbled toward the window. A man stood near the tree line, his flashlight cutting through the dark. He looked like another camper, flannel jacket, hiking boots. Relief flooded through me so fast it felt like tears. I opened the door just a crack and shouted, "Yeah, I'm fine. Thought I heard something out here." He took a few steps closer, beam still pointed at the ground. "Yeah, I saw your light flicker earlier. Figured I'd check. These woods can be weird at night." I wanted to thank him, to step outside and talk, but something felt wrong. His flashlight was steady, but I couldn't see his face. Just shadow. He was close enough now that the light should have shown him clearly, but it didn't. It was like it stopped right before his features. Then he said, "You should come out. It's safer out here." My stomach turned cold. No one says that in the middle of nowhere. Not to a stranger. Not when you're both alone. I shut the door and locked it. For a few seconds there was silence. Then a slow knock on the door. Not loud. Gentle. Almost polite. "You sure?" he said. "You don't want to be in there alone." That's when the RV rocked again, harder than before. Something hit the side. The man outside didn't move, didn't react, just stood there. Smiling now, or at least that's what I thought I saw when the porch light flickered back on for a split second. I ran to the driver's seat and started the engine. Gravel spit out from under the tires as I pulled out of that spot, headlights cutting through the dark. I didn't look in the mirrors. I didn't want to know. I drove until I hit the highway, until the stars disappeared behind gas station lights and asphalt, and I parked beside a semi at a rest stop. Only then did I notice the streaks on the windshield, same as the window. 5 long marks, dragged downward, and in the dust beside them, drawn by something wet, was a single word. Come out. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I parked under the flickering sodium lights of the rest stop, surrounded by 18-wheelers and the hum of diesel engines, but it didn't matter. Even in the crowd, the fear followed me. It clung like smoke inside the RV. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw that word, "come out," written across the windshield. I kept the engine idling for warmth and sat behind the wheel, staring at the gas station sign reflecting off the glass. My hands were trembling, not from cold, but from that deep, animal kind of adrenaline that doesn't let go. You can't reason with it. It just sits inside you, whispering that something's still wrong. Around 3 a.m, a highway patrol car pulled into the lot. I thought about flagging it down, explaining what had happened, but what would I even say? That something was on my roof in the middle of nowhere. And a man who wasn't quite human told me to come outside. They'd think I'd drinking or lost my mind. So I stayed quiet, watched the officer grab coffee and leave. The next morning, I drove east toward Utah. I told myself I'd put miles between me and that night, that I'd shake it off once I reached civilization. But the unease didn't fade. The RV felt different, heavier somehow, like the air inside had thickened. The smell of sagebrush and burnt rubber followed me for miles, even with the windows open. By noon, I stopped at a mechanic's in Delta, Utah, to check the undercarriage. I told him I might have hit something on a gravel road. He climbed under with a flashlight, muttering to himself. When he came out, he looked at me with a puzzled expression. "You've got scratches all over the underside," he said, "like something scraped along it, front to back, not rocks. These are long, Straight lines, almost like claws. He laughed at his own joke, but I didn't. "How deep?" I asked. He shrugged. "Deep enough to strip the paint in some spots? You drive through brush or something?" "Yeah," I lied. "Probably that." He charged me $50 for the inspection. I paid and left, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Claw marks. Underside of the RV. If something had been under there, no. I forced the thought away. Logic. Always go back to logic. Maybe it was debris on the road. Maybe my mind was trying to attach meaning to coincidence. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't been alone when I drove off last night, that something had come with me. That night, I parked at a small campground near Fish Lake National Forest. I picked it because there were other RVs nearby. Families, retirees, the comforting sound of laughter and music. It felt safe. I made small talk with a couple from Oregon, told them I was just passing through. When they asked how I slept on the road, I said, "Depends on the night." When the sun went down, I finally felt my shoulders relax. The firelight, the chatter of people, the glow of a dozen camper lights, it all felt like protection. I told myself nothing could happen here, but fear doesn't need isolation. It just needs silence. Sometime after midnight, the campground went quiet. One by one, the other RVs turned off their lights. The fire pits dimmed to embers. I was half asleep when I heard it again. 3 soft taps, then 2. The same rhythm as before. I opened my eyes, and the ceiling above me seemed to move in the faint moonlight, just slightly, as if weight pressed down from above. I sat up, pulse hammering. "No," I whispered to myself. "Not again." I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside before I could talk myself out of it. The air was cold enough to sting my skin. The forest stood perfectly still. No wind, no animals, just that vast, unmoving silence that doesn't belong in nature. I aimed the flashlight at the roof of the RV, but the beam caught something else first. A man standing 10 feet away, half hidden behind a tree. He wasn't moving. He wasn't even trying to hide, really. He just stood there, arms at his sides, watching me. "Hey!" I shouted, louder than I meant to. "Who are you?" He didn't answer. I took a step back toward the RV, but my body froze when I realized something impossible. His clothes were the same as the man from Dry Creek Hollow. Same flannel, same boots, but his face was different. Older, worn, sunken. He stepped forward and I saw his eyes. They weren't right. Too dark, too empty. Then he smiled and said, "Took you long enough to stop." I didn't think. I ran. Slammed the door shut behind me, locked it, and started the engine. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely shift into gear. The moment the headlights hit the trees, the man was gone. Not running. Just gone. I drove out of that campground without looking back. Every mile felt like running from something older than fear itself. My radio crackled once with static, then went dead. The road ahead was empty. By sunrise, I'd made it to Moab. I parked at a crowded rest area and finally turned off the ignition. The silence that followed felt like a vacuum. I sat there for hours, staring at the desert horizon, trying to convince myself I was safe. Then, just as I began to drift into uneasy sleep, I heard a sound from beneath the RV. A faint scratching. Slow. Rhythmic. I dropped to the floor, pressed my ear against the metal. It was coming from directly beneath the driver's seat. I crawled outside, half expecting to see nothing. But the moment I crouched beside the vehicle, a piece of fabric fluttered from underneath, shredded flannel. I stepped back fast, heart hammering, eyes wide. No one was there. The desert was still. But the ground beneath the RV was disturbed, dirt pushed up like something had crawled under. I drove straight to a motel in town. Couldn't bring myself to stay in that vehicle another second. I paid cash, double the rate, and didn't even unpack. Just locked the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at my hands. They were shaking again. That night I dreamed of footsteps circling the RV, of hands pressing against the windows from the inside. When I woke, it was still dark. The motel clock read 3:12 a.m., and outside in the parking lot, the security light flickered, just once before going out. I peered through the curtain. My RV was parked right beneath it, half lit by the moon. On the windshield, in the same place as before, something was written again, letters drawn in dust, trembling under the glow. It said, "Come out! You left something." I froze. My keys were on the nightstand. I hadn't been near the RV since daylight. There was no one else with access. I wanted to run, to leave everything behind, but some stubborn instinct told me to understand before I fled. I couldn't just keep driving from shadows. So I waited for dawn. When the first light broke, I forced myself outside. The air smelled like rust and earth. The writing was still there. I circled the RV, heart pounding, checking for footprints. There were none. Not one. But there was something else. Under the driver's side door, pressed into the dirt, was a set of markings, long, deep grooves. 5 parallel lines, exactly like the ones that had been on the window. Only this time, they led away. Not toward the woods, not toward the road. Straight into the desert. I followed them for 20 feet, then 50. The ground grew softer, sand giving way to red dust. The tracks continued, carving into the earth like something heavy had been dragged. Then, without warning, they stopped. No footprints, no end, just nothing. The wind picked up and the dust began to cover them. In minutes, they were gone, erased like they'd never existed. I stood there, staring at the empty desert, feeling that old whisper rise again in the back of my mind. That same voice from the roof, only now it was inside me. "You should come out." I walked back to the RV, every step heavier than the last. I didn't drive for the rest of the day. Just sat behind the wheel, watching the horizon, wondering how far you can run before the road starts running with you. By the third day, something inside me had changed. I wasn't just afraid anymore. I was exhausted, mentally, physically, spiritually. Fear had burned itself into fatigue. I kept replaying that phrase in my head. You left something, like a riddle I couldn't solve. What could I have possibly left behind? I checked every cabinet, every drawer, every corner of the RV. Nothing. Everything I owned was here. But maybe that wasn't what it meant. By late afternoon, I decided to drive again. I didn't know where to go, only that I couldn't stay still. I headed south, following Highway 191, until I reached a place called Hole in the Rock Road. The irony didn't escape me. It was a long dirt stretch, cutting through red cliffs and badlands, a desolate, open place where the horizon stretched forever. It felt like the edge of the world. Maybe that's why I stopped there. Maybe I needed to see where the world ended. The air was dry and sharp with dust. The sun glared low, turning everything gold. I parked near a cluster of boulders and shut off the engine. The silence out there wasn't like the woods. It wasn't alive. It was ancient, hollow, like the earth itself was holding its breath. I sat outside for a while, watching shadows crawl up the cliffs. I told myself this would be it, the place I'd finally let go of whatever was chasing me. Maybe if I stayed still long enough, it would get bored. Maybe it would move on. As the sun disappeared, I felt the temperature drop fast. The desert at night is a strange thing. It doesn't just cool, it empties. The heat escapes so completely that the air feels thinner, like oxygen is leaving with the light. I built a small fire and sat close, wrapping my jacket tighter around me. That's when I saw movement near the edge of the firelight. Not a person, not an animal, just a shape, tall, still-like, half-lit by flame and shadow. I squinted, but every time I focused, it seemed to shift slightly, like heat distortion. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of light, but then I noticed something I hadn't before, the smell. It wasn't sage or smoke. It was wet soil, mold, and iron. The same smell that had lingered in the RV after Dry Creek Hollow. The shape took a step forward. It didn't walk right. Its movements were too smooth, too deliberate, like it was gliding instead of stepping. I could make out shoulders, arms, a head, but no details, no face. Just darkness shaped like a person. My body froze, but my mind screamed to move. Run. Get inside. Lock the door. But fear has a way of pinning you down, convincing you that stillness might make you invisible. I gripped the handle of my flashlight and whispered to myself, "It's not real." That's when it spoke. Not out loud, not in the air, but inside me, like someone whispering behind my thoughts. "You shouldn't have left." The voice wasn't angry. It was patient. Sad, almost. I stumbled backward, the flashlight dropping from my hand. The shape tilted its head, mimicking me, like it was studying the motion. Then it started walking toward the RV. I ran, fumbled with the handle, threw myself inside, and slammed the door shut. The windows rattled as I locked them all, one by one. I backed away from the door, breathing hard, watching the fire flicker through the glass. The shadow stood just beyond the light. It didn't try to open the door. It didn't make a sound. It just stood there, facing me. Then it raised one arm slowly and pointed at the ground beside the RV. I followed its gesture through the window. At first, I didn't see anything. Then the firelight shifted, and I noticed something half buried in the dirt, something small and metallic, glinting faintly. A keychain. My old one, the one that had fallen from my jeans pocket that night in Dry Creek Hollow. I recognized it instantly, the faded leather tag from my first job site, the one I'd carried for 15 years. I hadn't even realized it was gone. My heart pounded as I stared at it, lying there in the dust. Then I heard the whisper again. You left something. My skin went cold. My mind raced to understand what that meant, what it really wanted. Maybe it wasn't about the keychain. Maybe it was something bigger. Maybe it was about the part of me that had stayed behind in that dark forest, the part that had believed I was alone when I wasn't. The fire outside went out all at once, as if snuffed by an unseen hand. The light vanished, leaving only the pale silver of the moon. The figure was gone. But something moved on the roof again. I could hear it crawling, slow, deliberate, pressing down with weight that made the metal groan. My breathing grew shallow. I grabbed my keys, ready to start the engine and floor it, but before I could, the whisper came again. This time it was clearer. Don't run. You already brought it with you. The lights in the RV flickered once, twice, then went out. Total darkness. I could hear the sound of something sliding down the side of the vehicle, the faint drag of fingertips against the glass. I held my breath. Then from behind me, inside, the floor creaked. I turned slowly, flashlight trembling in my hand. The beam swept across the small kitchen, the couch, the cabinets. Nothing. But when it reached the mirror above the sink, I saw movement, something shifting in the reflection, a face, mine. But it wasn't me. The reflection was smiling. I dropped the light. It rolled across the floor, casting wild, spinning shadows. I stumbled backwards, slammed into the wall, heart hammering so violently I could taste copper. Then the whisper changed. It wasn't just in my head anymore. It came from every direction, low and layered, like wind through bone. Come out! Come out! Come out! The door handle started to turn. Slowly, deliberately. I lunged forward, slammed my shoulder against it, locked it again, but the handle kept twisting under invisible weight. I screamed, raw, terrified, and something in me snapped. I wasn't going to die hiding in fear. I wasn't going to let whatever this was decide how the story ended. I threw the door open. The desert was empty. Moonlight bathed the sand in silver. The shape was gone. The wind had returned, soft but steady, brushing dust across my boots. I took a single step outside. The air felt different, heavy but calm, like a storm that had already passed. I looked down. The keychain lay in the dirt, untouched. I picked it up, brushed it clean, and felt something release inside me. Maybe it was relief, maybe surrender. The whisper came one last time, faint as breath. Now you remember. And then silence. When morning came, the RV looked normal again. No marks, no smudges, no scratches underneath. Just sunlight streaming through the windows and the desert stretching forever. I drove until I hit pavement again, then another town, then another, until eventually the fear started to dull, not gone, but distant, like an echo fading over hills. I never went back to Dry Creek Hollow. Never stayed completely alone again either. But sometimes, late at night, parked beneath a quiet sky, I still hear tapping, 3 soft knocks, a pause, then 2. And when that happens, I whisper back into the dark, steady as I can manage. I didn't leave anything behind this time, because maybe that's the lesson I was meant to learn. Out here, in the wild places where silence lives, what follows you isn't always something outside. Sometimes it's what you carry with you. The fear you tried to bury, the guilt you never faced, the memory you refused to claim. And until you do, It'll keep finding ways to call you out. I never thought I'd find myself renting a camper van from a corner of the internet that didn't even show up on Google. But back in early spring, when I was planning my first solo trip through Nevada, all the regular rental sites were booked out. The weather had just turned perfect, that narrow window between the cold desert nights and the unbearable summer heat. And every nomad, influencer, and weekend explorer had already claimed their spot. I was desperate to get out there, to clear my head, to see something vast and silent. I'd just gotten out of a long relationship, one of those slow burn breakups where you spend months pretending you're still okay. I'd sold the last few things that reminded me of her, including the tent we used to camp with, and decided I'd hit the road in something old school, a Volkswagen camper. I wanted to feel that classic freedom again. Just me, the open road, and the kind of quiet that lets you finally hear yourself think. A friend at work, the kind of guy who always knows a guy, sent me a link late one night. It wasn't an Airbnb or RV share link. It was a plain white page with an unmarked URL that ended in .onion. The site looked like it had been built in 2004. No branding, no logos, just a list of vehicles with grainy photos, pickup coordinates instead of addresses, and short cryptic descriptions. One of them caught my eye. 1977 VW Westphalia, full tank, full fridge, drive until you remember who you are. The pickup point was listed as outside of Tonopah. No exact address, just coordinates. The price? $100 for 3 nights. It sounded insane. But I wired the deposit through the site's payment gateway anyway. It asked for crypto, no surprise there. And a minute later, I got an email from a scrambled address. It said only this: "You'll find the keys on the driver's seat. Don't stay longer than you need to." At the time, I laughed. The whole thing felt like a weird adventure, like the kind of thing you tell your friends over a campfire. I figured someone was just running an underground rental service for classic cars. It didn't seem sinister, just secretive. When I got to Tonopah, I followed the coordinates down a cracked desert road that split off from the highway. The pavement ended after 10 miles, turning into dirt and gravel, lined with rusted fences and sagebrush. The wind out there carried a smell that I can still remember, dry dust mixed with something faintly metallic, like a wet penny. The coordinates led me to what looked like an abandoned rest stop. There were a few concrete picnic tables, a half-collapsed shelter, and an old vending machine full of sand. The Volkswagen was parked at the far edge of the lot, facing the open desert. It was exactly as the photo showed, mustard yellow with a white roof, the kind of retro beauty that makes you smile even when you're alone. There were no other vehicles in sight. The driver's window was rolled down slightly, and when I looked inside, I saw the keys hanging from the ignition and a small envelope on the seat. The envelope just said, "For the traveler." Inside was a folded map, paper, not GPS, with a single route highlighted in red marker. It wound north through a series of ghost towns, Belmont, Taibo, Manhattan, then into the high desert beyond the known routes. No directions back, no return instructions. I thought it was kind of poetic, like whoever ran this thing was trying to make people experience something real, something disconnected from the world we live in. The van started on the first try. The engine made that soft, coughing rumble only an old VW makes, like it's waking up from a dream. The radio didn't work, and the glove box was empty except for a Polaroid of a couple standing in front of the same van, smiling. On the back of the photo, June 9th, 2019, "Don't follow the lights." I figured it was just some inside joke, maybe a warning about cops or wild animals. I tossed it in the cup holder and started driving. The first few hours were beautiful. The desert sun hit the van's windshield in gold streaks, and the wind hummed through the cracked seals of the window. The road climbed and fell like a quiet rhythm, the kind of silence that hums deep inside your chest. But as I got deeper into the route, I started noticing small things that didn't add up. Every time I passed through a town marked on the map, it didn't look like a town anymore, just ruins. places half swallowed by the desert. In one, I found a gas pump still standing but covered in dust so thick you could carve words into it. In another, a church with its doors chained shut and a dozen shoes scattered across the front steps. Then there were the license plates, dozens of them nailed to fence posts and tree trunks along the road. Different states, different years, none newer than 2019. By the second night, I'd driven about 200 miles from where I'd started. I stopped near the base of a rocky ridge where the map showed a campsite. But when I got there, it wasn't a campsite, just a ring of blackened stones and a rusted folding chair. I parked the van, turned off the engine, and sat for a while listening. The desert was dead quiet, except for the slow creak of the van cooling off, the kind of silence that feels alive, like it's waiting for something. I set up inside the van, pulled the curtains, cracked a beer, and tried to shake off the weirdness. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks, that I was overanalyzing everything because I'd been alone too long. But around midnight, I woke up to a sound that didn't belong there, a soft tapping. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the rhythm was too deliberate. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. It was coming from the passenger side window. I sat up slowly, trying not to breathe too loud. The curtains were drawn, but I could see the faint movement of a shadow outside, someone standing close enough to the glass that their shape distorted with each knock. My hand went to the flashlight near my sleeping bag. I didn't turn it on. I just waited. The tapping stopped. Silence. Then from behind the van, another 3 knocks. I froze. My heart felt like it was lodged in my throat. The air inside the camper felt heavy, like the oxygen had been sucked out. I tried to tell myself it was animals, the metal contracting, anything. But then I heard a voice. Not words. Just a low hum, like someone whispering through their teeth. It circled the van. Slow, dragging steps on the gravel. I could hear the crunch of each one. When I finally gathered the nerve, I yanked open the curtain, and there was nothing there. Just the faint reflection of my own face against the desert beyond. That night, I didn't sleep. The next morning, I got out of the van and looked around. There were fresh footprints in the sand near the passenger side, bare feet. Not animal prints, human. The tracks circled the van once, then disappeared into the desert. No direction, no destination. I wanted to leave, I really did. But the van wouldn't start. The key turned, the lights came on, but the engine made no sound. It was like the ignition wasn't even connected anymore. And then I noticed something else. The odometer had reset to 0. I stared at it for a long time, wondering if I'd somehow gone insane. But I knew what I'd seen before. 200 miles. Now it showed nothing. I opened the map again and realized that a new red line had been drawn. A different route. It wasn't in marker this time. It looked printed, like it had always been there. The path curved back toward Tonopah, but then extended far past it into an area of the desert that wasn't labeled, just white space. The paper felt warm in my hand, like it had been sitting in sunlight. I didn't want to believe it, but something in me, some quiet, ancient instinct, told me that map was rewriting itself. And whatever it was leading me toward wasn't done with me yet. I sat in the driver's seat until the heat became unbearable. The desert sun rose like an accusation, glaring down on the van until the metal hissed to the touch. I'd rolled the windows down to let air move through, but it didn't help. The whole place felt wrong. Not just empty, but watching. By noon, I gave up on waiting for the van to start and decided to walk toward the nearest mark on the map, a place labeled simply Rhyolite Ridge. It looked only a few miles away, but in that heat, distance bends. The desert can trick you with its stillness. It makes you think something is closer than it really is, until you've spent hours walking toward a mirage. I packed a bottle of water and started walking. Every crunch of gravel under my boots echoed back at me. There were no birds, no insects, nothing alive. The only movement came from the heat shimmer rising off the ground like smoke. Halfway there, I found something that made my stomach twist. A trail of tire tracks leading off the main path, the same narrow tread pattern as the Volkswagen. They were half buried in dust, but fresh enough that I could still make out the direction. The strange thing was, they led away from where I'd parked. I followed them for a few minutes before they just stopped. No turn, no braking marks. They just ended in the middle of nowhere. I remember staring down at them, thinking, how could something just vanish without leaving a trace? That's when I heard it. The same 3 knocks. But this time they weren't on metal. They were distant, like someone was tapping 2 pieces of wood together, slow and deliberate. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. I turned in every direction, but the desert was the same in all of them. Empty hills, rock, scrub. I told myself I was dehydrated. Maybe the heat was getting to me. But when I started walking again, I realized the sound was following me. It wasn't an echo. It was tracking me. By the time I reached Rhyolite Ridge, my water was gone, and my lips were cracked from the dry air. The ridge wasn't much, just a series of broken mine shafts and rusted beams jutting out of the earth like bones. I climbed up one of the low slopes to get a better view, hoping maybe I'd see a road or a structure, something. Instead, I saw another van. Same make, same mustard yellow color. Parked about half a mile away in a shallow basin of rock. Relief hit me first. Maybe someone else had rented one. Maybe they could help me get mine started. I started down the ridge, calling out as I walked. My voice sounded small, swallowed by the air. When I got close enough, I noticed the door of the other van was open. I called out again, louder this time. No answer. Inside, the air was stale and sour, like old metal and mold. There was a sleeping bag unrolled on the bench seat, and next to it a phone. Cracked, dead, covered in a thin film of dust. The fridge was still humming faintly, though the engine wasn't running. And taped to the steering wheel was a note. If you're reading this, you shouldn't have come back. That's when I saw the odometer. It read 000000. Exactly like mine. I stumbled backwards, scanning the ground, looking for footprints or tracks, anything to show where the driver went. There were prints, but they didn't lead anywhere. They just circled the van in uneven loops, like whoever had been there couldn't decide which direction to go. The last few prints were deep, erratic, like someone running. Then they stopped. Just stopped. I looked out toward the horizon, and for the first time, I thought I saw movement. Not clear, not distinct, just a ripple of shadow out where the sunlight turned the desert white. It was moving slowly, upright, and I couldn't tell if it was a person or something else. I backed away until my calves hit the side of the van. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my jaw. The figure didn't come closer. It just stood there, like it was waiting for me to turn around. I didn't. I walked backward, never looking away, until I reached the ridge again. By the time I looked up, it was gone. Back at my own van, the air felt heavier than before, like the entire desert had shifted a few inches closer. The wind had died completely. The world felt sealed shut. I tried the ignition again, even though I knew it wouldn't work. But this time, when I turned the key, the radio flickered on. Static filled the cabin, sharp, broken noise that made the speakers buzz. But beneath it, I could hear something. A voice, maybe. Slow, distorted, but human. It was saying my name. At first, I thought it was my mind twisting the sound, but then it repeated, clear as day, Evan. I slammed the radio off. The air inside the van was suffocating, thick with the smell of gasoline and something sour, like burnt hair. I opened the door, and that's when I saw them. 3 handprints on the outside of the window, smudged, pale, and wide, like they'd been pressed there in the night. I started running. I didn't care where. I just knew I couldn't stay near that van another second. I climbed the ridge again, my lungs burning from the dry air. From up there, the whole desert stretched out before me, but it didn't look the same anymore. The colors were wrong, too sharp, too bright. The horizon looked closer than it should have been, bending slightly like the sky was caving inward. And in that warped distance, I saw them. Rows of yellow Volkswagen vans, half buried in the sand, some overturned, some upright, dozens of them, maybe more, each one facing the same direction, toward the empty horizon. It hit me then. I wasn't the first one to rent this van. I wasn't even close. When I made it back down, the odometer on my van had changed again, not to 0, but to 2019, the year written on that Polaroid. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep inside. I laid my sleeping bag outside the van, staring up at the stars that looked almost too sharp to be real. Around midnight, I heard footsteps again. Slow, crunching the gravel near the driver's side. I didn't move. Then came the knocking, 3 times. But this time the sound wasn't on glass. It came from beneath the van. I couldn't breathe. My body went cold, and before I could react, I heard it. A whisper so close it felt like it was right beside my ear. "You drove too far." I bolted up, turned my flashlight on, and swung it toward the sound. Nothing. Just empty sand and the pale curve of the van. But then for the briefest second, I saw something crouched near the back bumper. Not human. Not animal. Its outline was bent, wrong, like it had too many joints, too many shadows clinging to it. When the light hit it, it vanished. And when I looked down again, my footprints were gone. All of them. The desert was smooth, unmarked, like I'd never been there at all. The next morning, the van started on its own. The engine roared to life the moment I stepped inside. The fuel gauge read full. The radio came on again, but this time there was no static, just silence. A perfect, hollow silence. I looked at the map, and the red route had changed one final time. A new line traced back toward Tonopah, looping neatly over where I'd started. Like it wanted me to return the van. And maybe that's what I did. Or maybe that's what it wanted me to think I did. Because when I finally saw the highway again, everything looked off. The signs were there, but the town names weren't the same. The air felt thicker. The sky a few shades darker. And when I pulled into the rest stop where it all began, the Volkswagen wasn't yellow anymore. It was white. The keys were gone, but the envelope was back on the seat. This time it said, "For the next traveler." I left it there. I walked until the sun set, until I found another road, another town. I never spoke about it again. But sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I still hear the faint sound of knocking. 3 times. And sometimes it's coming from inside my house. I tried to tell myself it was over, that I'd escaped whatever strange cycle that van was part of. But escape isn't always about leaving a place. Sometimes it's about leaving behind the version of yourself that believed in control. For weeks after I got back, I couldn't sleep right. I'd wake up at odd hours, heart pounding, sure that someone was standing just outside my window. The sound of a car engine made me flinch. Even the smell of gasoline, something I used to love, now turned my stomach. I moved back into the city, Las Vegas, small apartment, 4th floor. Concrete, traffic, people. I thought being surrounded by life would drown out whatever silence had followed me home. But it didn't. The silence learned how to blend in. It came through flickering lights or in moments when the power went out and I caught my reflection in the window, not moving quite in sync. Sometimes I'd wake up to the faint smell of desert dust, and though the windows were sealed and the nearest sand was hours away. A few months later, I got curious. I told myself it was harmless. I opened my laptop one night, went looking for that old site. I shouldn't have. I knew I shouldn't. But curiosity is a sickness when fear sits too long in silence. The link still worked. Same plain white page, same list of vans. But the descriptions had changed. At the top of the list was one I recognized immediately. Mustard yellow, 1977 VW Westphalia. But the description no longer said, "Drive until you remember who you are." Now it read, "Returned, awaiting new traveler." I scrolled further down, and that's when I saw something that made me stop breathing. There was a new listing, 1981 VW Transporter, silver, last seen near Las Vegas. Attached was a photo, not a grainy one this time, crisp, recent. My face reflected faintly in the driver's side window of my apartment complex's parking lot. The caption below it said, "Available soon." That was 2 weeks ago. Since then, I've started noticing small things again. A faint ticking sound that comes from somewhere near the floor at night. My car keys moved from the hook by the door to the kitchen counter, though I live alone. And last night, when I came home from work, I found a folded piece of paper slid under my door. It wasn't an envelope this time, just a map. A single red line drawn through Nevada, looping out into the desert. And at the bottom, in the same faint handwriting I'd seen on that Polaroid, "Don't follow the lights." I sat there for an hour, staring at it, telling myself it was someone's joke, a prank, a coincidence. But when I turned the map over, there was a smear of something brown on the back. Dust, maybe, or dried blood. That night I dreamed of the desert again, but this time it wasn't silent. It was humming, a low vibration that seemed to come from beneath the sand. When I looked down, I saw the ground shifting, the outlines of dozens of vans buried just beneath the surface, headlights faintly glowing like eyes opening in the dark. And I heard a voice, the same one from the radio. "You drove too far." I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, and for a moment I didn't recognize where I was. The apartment looked smaller, the walls a slightly different color. My reflection in the TV screen wasn't looking at me anymore. It was staring just past my shoulder. I didn't turn around. I know what's there, or maybe I don't. I think sometimes we mistake technology for safety, that if we can track something, it can't hurt us, that if there's a website, a transaction, a rating system, it must be legitimate. But the deep web doesn't just hide illegal things. It hides the things that don't want to be explained, the things that use curiosity like a hook. And if you ever find yourself staring at an offer that feels too specific, like it knows what you're running from, don't click it. Because these things don't sell vans. They sell experiences, journeys that rewrite you, places that don't want to be left behind. Sometimes I still catch myself driving late at night, not sure why. I'll pass a rest stop and feel something tug inside me, like a memory I almost recognize. I'll glance at the rearview mirror and swear I see that yellow paint flash past in the darkness, keeping pace just behind the taillights. I know it's waiting. Because that's the truth no one tells you about those deep web RV rentals. You don't just rent a vehicle. You rent a story that keeps going, whether you want it to or not. You drive until you remember who you are, and then it shows you who you were never meant to be. Maybe that's why people keep taking those trips. Maybe they think they can outsmart whatever's out there. But you can't outsmart something that doesn't need to follow the rules of the road, something that moves through silence, through coordinates that don't exist anymore. And if one day you find a van parked alone off some forgotten desert road with an envelope on the seat and a note that says, "For the traveler, just walk away. Don't open the door. Don't look inside." Because if you do, you'll see your reflection in the window and it'll already be looking back. And when you hear those 3 knocks, even years later, no matter where you are, don't answer. That's not the wind. It's the road calling you home. I used to think every RV told a story. Families, retirees, wanderers chasing the open road. But some RVs tell stories no one wants to hear. They sit abandoned at the edges of campgrounds, forgotten by time, half swallowed by weeds or moss, their windows fogged from the inside. I never thought I'd be the one to open a door that should have stayed shut. My name's Colin. I'm 43 years old, and for the past decade, I've been traveling the U.S. in my RV, filming strange locations and forgotten highways. I thought I'd seen it all: ghost towns, empty motels, collapsed bridges. But nothing prepared me for the night I stumbled upon a place where time didn't just stop. It waited. It started outside Flagstaff, Arizona, on a road that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. My GPS had gone blank an hour earlier, the screen frozen between coordinates. I remember pulling off onto a dirt road lined with ponderosa pines, the sun bleeding out behind me. There was a strange smell, like damp plastic and burned sugar, the kind of smell that doesn't belong in nature. I followed it until I saw the outlines of RVs scattered through the trees, 10 or 12 of them at least. They looked like a camp from the 70s that had been abandoned overnight. Some were still parked in neat rows, others tilted at angles, half sunk into the earth. Their license plates were faded, some with stickers from parks that didn't even exist anymore. But what caught me wasn't the decay, it was the silence. No birds, no wind, not even the clicking of insects. It was the kind of silence that feels aware, like it's listening. I stepped out of my RV with a flashlight. The air felt heavy, thicker than it should have been. My boots sank slightly into the dirt, and each step echoed too loudly. The first RV I approached had a door hanging open, its hinges coated with green rust. Inside, everything was exactly as if the owners had just stepped out for a moment. A folded newspaper on the dinette, a coffee mug on the counter, and a pair of shoes neatly placed near the bed. Only, the newspaper was dated 1989. I told myself it was an old campground that had closed after a wildfire or something, but that didn't explain the smell, or the fact that some of the curtains looked new, like someone had replaced them recently. I reached for one of the cabinets above the sink, curious. When I opened it, a whisper of air escaped, followed by a faint metallic chime, like wind bells far away. I froze. It wasn't wind, it was inside the RV. Something about the air shifted, colder now. My flashlight flickered as if something moved behind me. I turned. Nothing. The newspaper on the table was fluttering slightly, though the air was still. And then I saw it. Etched faintly into the linoleum floor, near the refrigerator, was a single word: wait. The light dimmed again, this time longer. I stepped outside, my heart pounding in my throat. I told myself I was just tired. Maybe a prank, maybe a trick of old reflections. But as I looked across the clearing, I noticed faint glows coming from a few of the other RV windows. Yellow, flickering, like candlelight. I called out, half relieved to think someone else might be there. No answer. I decided to approach another RV, the one with a glowing window. The closer I got, the stronger that burnt sugar smell became. It coated the back of my throat. I reached the door and knocked gently. The sound echoed strangely, like hitting the side of a hollow drum underwater. No response. So I tried the handle. It turned easily. Inside, a lantern flickered on the table, though there was no flame. It was battery-powered but ancient, one of those old Coleman lanterns with a cracked green base. Around it were photographs pinned to the walls, dozens of them. Families smiling beside RVs, picnic tables, lakes. All of them looked like they'd been taken decades apart, but each had something wrong with them. The same RV appeared in all the photos, unchanged even as the people grew older, then younger again. In one photo, a woman in a red dress stood in front of that same RV with a little boy holding her hand. The next photo, taken years later, showed the same woman, same dress, but the boy was gone. Another photo after that showed a man I swear I recognized. Me. I was standing behind the same RV, half-shadowed, wearing the same jacket I had on right then. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair. The lantern's light flickered violently, then went out. For a second, the darkness had weight. I could feel something in it, like someone breathing near my neck. I ran. Out of the RV, through the clearing, my boots slipping on damp soil. I didn't stop until I reached my own rig. The headlights barely worked, but I turned them on anyway, flooding the clearing with a pale beam. That's when I saw movement, figures stepping out from the other RVs. At first, I thought they were people, but they didn't move right. Their limbs bent wrong, their shadows stretching too far. One of them carried something, a lantern like the one I'd seen inside. Another dragged what looked like a camping chair, scraping it across the ground. I couldn't tell if they were coming toward me or away. I jumped into my driver's seat and turned the key. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. I hit the gas. Gravel flew. But the road behind me wasn't the same one I'd come in on. The GPS still showed nothing, just a gray screen. I drove for what felt like hours, the same trees passing by, the same hill rising and falling, no exits, no signs. When I finally stopped, dawn was breaking. I stepped out again, desperate for a sense of direction. My tires had left no tracks, none, as if the ground had swallowed them. I walked around to the back of my RV and froze. There, painted in dust across my rear window, were 5 handprints, small, child-sized, I didn't camp for a week after that. I stayed in motels, barely sleeping, haunted by the image of that child in the photo. But curiosity's a sickness. A few months later, I went back. I had to. I brought a friend this time, Jake, another full-time RVer, a guy who believed nothing he couldn't touch. We found the road again, but it was different, narrower, like it had been swallowed by the forest. The air still had that strange sweetness, though now it was faint, like the memory of something burnt. The clearing was empty this time. No RVs, no signs of life. Just flattened patches of grass where tires might have been. Jake laughed it off, said maybe I'd dreamed it. He went to light a cigarette and stopped mid-motion. "Colin," he said quietly, "come look at this." On the back of a tree, someone had carved a row of dates, decades apart. The last one was from the week I'd been there. Underneath it, someone had scratched my name. That was when the forest went still again, too still. Not even the sound of the match he dropped. Just silence, thick and absolute. Then faintly, a sound started up again. The chime. That metallic ringing I'd heard the first time. It was coming from deeper in the woods, rhythmic, like a pulse. Jake whispered, "It's wind." But there was no wind. The air was dead. The sound grew louder, closer, until I realized it wasn't metal, it was glass. Dozens of wind chimes made from broken glass bottles hanging somewhere ahead. We followed the sound. I don't know why. Maybe because stopping would have felt worse. The smell came back too, the burnt sweetness. The trees began to thin, revealing another clearing. And there they were. The RVs. Back again, parked exactly where they'd been before. Only this time, every door was open. We stood at the edge of the clearing, staring at the row of open doors. Every instinct told me not to move closer, but the forest behind us felt worse, like stepping backward would mean something unseen could finally reach us. The air was motionless, but every few seconds the chimes rang again, swinging softly in a wind that wasn't there. Jake muttered, "They weren't here before." "Colin, I swear to God, they weren't here." I didn't answer. My light skimmed across the nearest RV, and the beam trembled against its aluminum siding. There were symbols scratched into it, circles intersecting with lines, like some kind of crude map. Beneath it, I could make out a set of handprints, smaller than mine, baked into the grime. We stepped closer. My breath sounded too loud, echoing back at me as though the air had a hollow shape. I reached the first open door and shined my flashlight inside. The interior was almost identical to the one I'd entered before. The dinette, the cracked counters, the sleeping bunk. But everything looked wrong in small, quiet ways. The shadows didn't line up with the light. The angles of the walls felt subtly off, as if the RV had been built from memory instead of measurement. And that smell, stronger now like melted plastic laced with perfume, was thick enough to taste. Jake climbed in first. "No one's here. See?" He walked toward the back, waving his light. Just another abandoned rig. I was about to step in when something caught my eye. On the small table near the door lay a photograph. It was curled at the edges and covered in a fine layer of dust, but I could still make out the image. It was me and Jake, standing beside our RVs, smiling. The photo had been taken here, right here in this clearing. Only in the picture, our faces were blurred, stretched, as if we'd moved during the shot. "Jake," I whispered, "look at this." He turned, and for a split second, his expression collapsed. Shock, confusion, fear. Then he forced a grin. "Probably someone messing with us." But his voice cracked when he said it. The lantern flickered. The temperature dropped. I watched my own breath plume in front of me. Then, from somewhere deep in the forest, we heard a low mechanical hum, like a generator coming to life. The ground vibrated softly beneath our feet. Jake muttered, "Someone's here." We backed out of the RV, scanning the clearing. The hum grew louder, joined by something else, a faint rhythm like footsteps, synchronized with that chime of glass. It came from all directions, echoing between the trees, impossible to locate. "Let's go," Jake said, grabbing my arm. "Now." We moved fast toward the road, but the forest had changed. The trail we'd taken in was gone, replaced by dense underbrush. I could still see the beam of my RV's headlights cutting through the trees in the distance, but it looked farther away than before. Much farther. We ran. The chimes grew frantic, clashing together as if warning us. The hum deepened into a droning vibration that I could feel through my chest. Then, as we reached the first line of RVs, something stepped out from behind one of them. It was tall, too tall to be a person. Its shape was draped in what looked like fabric or plastic sheeting that fluttered without wind. Through the folds, I caught glimpses of something underneath, pale, human-like, but stretched. Its head tilted in a slow, mechanical way as if it were studying us. Jake froze. "What the hell?" The thing raised an arm. A soft, wet sound came from its direction, like fingers peeling away from glass. Then the lanterns inside the RVs all flickered on at once, bathing the clearing in a dim orange light. Inside each doorway stood figures, motionless, facing us. They weren't alive. They couldn't be. Their skin looked waxy, drained, like old mannequins half melted by the sun. Their mouths were open, fixed in mid-word, and in every face the eyes were missing, just dark, hollow sockets filled with that same amber glow. Jake stumbled backward. "Colin, what is this?" The hum rose to a shriek. The lights inside the RVs began to pulse in rhythm, on, off on, like a heartbeat. I grabbed Jake's sleeve and pulled him toward the headlights, shouting over the sound. We ran through the mud, stumbling, nearly falling. The trees twisted in the corner of my vision, their trunks bending slightly, like they were leaning in to watch. When we finally reached my RV, I shoved him inside and slammed the door. I turned the key, nothing, not even a click. The engine was dead. The headlights flickered once and went out completely. Jake was pacing, gasping for breath. "It's the ground. It's messing with the battery. We'll wait till morning." But I couldn't shake the feeling that morning wouldn't come. I looked through the windshield, and that's when I saw movement, slow, deliberate. The tall figure was gliding toward us, its limbs dragging across the earth. Behind it, the other figures followed in a jerking rhythm, stopping and starting as if the world itself was skipping. Then, faintly, I heard something else. A whisper. Not from outside, from the dashboard speakers. It was my voice, repeating a single phrase over and over in a soft, monotone whisper. "You shouldn't have come back." Jake ripped the wires from the console, but the sound didn't stop. It grew louder, distorted, overlapping with itself until it became a rush of noise. The glass of the windshield fogged from the inside. Handprints began to appear, small ones again like before, pressing against the glass, then fading. The figures had reached the edge of the clearing now, surrounding us. Their heads tilted in unison. The tall one raised its arm again, pointing toward us. The RV's interior lights flickered, then went black. Everything went silent. For what felt like hours, we didn't move. Then, slowly, the hum began again, low and distant, fading away into the forest. When the lights came back on, the figures were gone. We didn't speak. We didn't sleep. As soon as dawn came, I turned the ignition again, and the engine started immediately, like nothing had ever been wrong. We drove until the sun was high, not saying a word. When we finally hit pavement, Jake exhaled, half laughing, half sobbing. "I told you, man. You can't go looking for stories. Sometimes the stories find you." But I didn't laugh, because when we stopped at a diner outside of town and stepped out of the RV, I saw it in the reflection of the glass window. Behind us, faintly visible in the reflection of my RV's side door, were two more figures standing in the doorway, still, silent, watching. And on the door itself, carved into the metal with something sharp, was a single word: "Stay." I ran my fingers over it that night in the motel parking lot. The edges were fresh, not rusted, not old. That was 6 months ago. Since then, Jake won't talk about it. He sold his RV and moved back east. I've kept traveling, but sometimes when I pull into a quiet campground, I still catch that faint burnt sugar smell on the wind. I'll glance around thinking it's just memory, but then I'll see it, far at the edge of the trees, just where the light fades. A reflection, a shape that doesn't belong. And somewhere deep inside, I know what it means. Those RVs were never abandoned. They were waiting. My name's Aaron. I'm 46 years old, a part-time mechanic and full-time wanderer. Every October, when the air starts to burn cold and the maples along the back roads turn to fire, I take my old Winnebago and head out west. I call it my reset month, a time to clear my head, to let the road uncoil my thoughts. But this October, somewhere between Utah's red dust and Nevada's empty highways, something happened that changed the way I look at RV camping forever. I've been camping most of my life. Grew up in Michigan, where fall meant ghost stories, pumpkin patches, and cold fingers wrapped around tin mugs of coffee. My dad used to tell me that the road teaches you who you really are. Not the road itself, but the things it shows you when there's no one else around. I never really understood that until this trip. I left Moab on a Thursday morning early when the desert was still gray and the air smelled like iron and dust. My plan was simple: cross into Nevada, follow Highway 50, the loneliest road in America, and park for a few nights near an old rest stop I'd heard about from another traveler. He said it was quiet, had a view of the desert basin that stretched for miles, and no one ever bothered you there. Perfect for reflection, for peace. By mid-afternoon, the light had gone gold, that strange October glow that makes everything feel cinematic and a little too still. I remember noticing how long the shadows stretched across the asphalt, mile-long fingers that followed me no matter how fast I drove. The radio had lost its signal hours ago, and the only sound left was the rhythmic hum of the tires and the occasional rattle from the cupboards in the back. When I finally saw the sign, a sun-faded metal board that just read "Rest Area, 2 miles," I felt relief. The road had been empty for hours. No cars, no trucks, no headlights, just me and the desert. The rest area wasn't much to look at. 2 picnic tables, a bathroom made of cracked concrete, and a single trash can blown over on its side. But the view was something else. A vast, open plain with low, jagged hills in the distance, the kind of place where the horizon looks like it's been drawn with a ruler. I parked the Winnebago facing west, set out my chair, and poured a drink. For a while, I just sat there, watching the sun sink behind the hills. It felt like one of those moments you wait for all year. Quiet, private, meaningful. Until I realized something odd. The desert wasn't quiet. It was almost quiet, but not completely. Under the silence, there was this low sound, faint, rhythmic, almost like breathing. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the RV. It was something steady, alive. I told myself it was my imagination, maybe the hum of the engine still in my ears. But as night settled in, that sound didn't go away. I made dinner, checked my phone, no signal, and tried to shake it off. You hear things in the wild, wind patterns, coyotes, your own pulse. All of it can trick you when you're alone. But that night, when I stepped outside to brush my teeth, I froze. There were footprints beside the RV. Not boot prints. Bare feet. Small. Child-sized. I stood there for a full minute, holding my flashlight over the dirt. The prints went from behind the RV toward the desert and disappeared into the darkness. I called out, "Hello? Someone out there?" Nothing. Just that breathing sound again. Closer now. I went inside, locked the door, and sat on the bed listening. The air vents clicked. The desert wind hissed through the seams. Every instinct told me to start the engine and drive. But another part of me, the rational part, said no. You're tired. You're spooking yourself. I slept maybe 2 hours that night. When I woke, it was just before dawn, and something had changed. The desert outside was soaked in this pale, almost metallic light, like moonlight, but wrong. I stepped out to stretch my legs and saw that the footprints were gone, completely erased. But in the distance, on a small rise, maybe 100 yards away, something was standing. A figure, still, facing me. I blinked, and the light shifted, and it was gone. That was the moment I knew I should have left, but I didn't, because fear has a strange way of disguising itself as curiosity. So I told myself I'd stay one more night. Maybe it was a trick of light, a traveler, a reflection. I didn't want to admit I was afraid, not after all these years of being seasoned. But as the sun climbed higher, I couldn't shake that presence. The desert felt charged, like static in the air before a storm. Around noon, I drove a few miles down a dirt road, hoping to find another pullout or some sign of civilization. Nothing, just endless scrub and stone. That's when I found the other RV. It was old, white, half sunk in the sand, with its door hanging open. There were no plates, no markings, no tire tracks, just sitting there like it had been waiting. I stepped inside. The air was thick, sour with mildew. A mattress lay torn open, stuffing spilling out like bones. The walls were scratched with words, dozens of them, written in shaky handwriting. It comes when the air goes still. I turned and got out fast. I could feel the sun pressing down, hot and heavy, like it was trying to bury me. When I got back to my own RV, I noticed something scratched into the driver's door. Fresh, shallow grooves in the paint. 4 parallel lines like fingernails dragged down metal. That night, I didn't turn on any lights. I sat in the dark, watching through the windshield as the horizon faded. The air went still again, totally still. No wind, no hum, no movement. Just that slow, rhythmic breathing in the dirt outside, closer, heavier. And then a knock. One soft knock on the back door, then another, then silence. I whispered to myself, "Don't move, don't move." But the knocking came again from the other side this time, like something circling the RV, testing each door, each window. I reached for the ignition key, my hands shaking, and that's when I heard it. A whisper through the vent. A child's voice, hoarse like it hadn't spoken in years. "Don't go." I don't think I've ever felt my pulse hammer the way it did in that moment. That whisper wasn't imagined. I know what hallucination sounds like, and that wasn't it. It came through the vent above the bed, threaded through the stale air like a thread of cold breath. A child's voice, soft but raw, like it had been scraped through sand. "Don't go." I froze. My first instinct was to shout, to demand who was there, but I couldn't. My throat locked up. It felt like if I spoke, I'd give it permission to come closer. I sat there, gripping the key, trying to control my breathing. Then, silence. For a moment, I thought maybe it had been the wind. The desert has a way of playing tricks when the air stands still. But when I leaned closer to the vent, I could hear it again, quieter now, further away. Almost as if it had crawled back into the ground. I couldn't stay there, not another second. I turned the key, and the engine came to life with that familiar growl. But the headlights flickered twice, then went dark. The dashboard lights blinked erratically, and I felt my stomach drop. I checked the fuse, the battery, everything. Nothing was wrong, nothing visible, but I could feel something wrong, deep in the bones of that RV, like it had inhaled whatever was outside. That's when I saw it. On the inside of the windshield, right above the steering wheel, smeared in what looked like dust or grease, a small handprint. I swore aloud, slammed the gear into drive, and floored it. Gravel kicked up behind me as I tore down that road, headlights dead, guided only by the faint silver of the desert moon. The road twisted and disappeared into shadows, and the more I drove, the more it felt like I wasn't moving at all, like the landscape was folding back over itself. I passed that same rest area sign, the one that read, "Rest Area, 2 miles." Except the letters looked different now. The paint was stripped, the edges rusted through, and someone had scratched something beneath it in small, uneven lines. 2 miles. Forever. My mouth went dry. I drove faster. The tires hit something, a bump, a shape, and I glanced in the rearview mirror. Nothing there. But for a split second, in the reflection of my own eyes, I could have sworn I saw a second face in the driver's seat window. Pale, small, watching. After what felt like hours, I finally saw lights ahead, a gas station, or maybe the ghost of one. I pulled in hard, engine sputtering, and jumped out. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of rust and gasoline. The station was half collapsed, its sign swaying on a broken hinge. I walked toward the front door, calling out. "Hello? Anyone here?" No answer. The inside looked abandoned, shelves empty, floor coated in dust, but the register light was on. A tiny red glow pulsing steady. I stepped closer and noticed something written across the counter, scratched deep into the wood. "Don't leave the lights off." I turned around. The Winnebago sat under the weak glow of the moon, a long shadow stretching toward the road. The air shifted again. That same strange stillness, the kind that makes your ears ring. I went back outside trying to start the RV again, and the door was open. I know I locked it. I know I did. Inside, the air felt wrong, heavier, colder. I saw condensation forming on the windows like breath, and on the floor just beneath the vent was a small pile of sand. Then a giggle. High-pitched, distant, but unmistakable. It echoed through the cabin, bouncing between the walls like the sound was circling me. That's when I lost it. I grabbed my flashlight, jumped out, and started running into the open desert. I didn't care where, I just needed distance. My boots crunched over gravel and bone-dry weeds until I stumbled onto a shallow depression in the earth. It looked like an old foundation. Maybe a small house once stood there. The moonlight hit something buried near the corner. Metal. I knelt down and brushed away the dirt. It was an old RV license plate. Nevada. Expired in 1997, the same color scheme as the abandoned RV I'd found earlier. And there, beside it, half buried in the sand, was a child's shoe. I stared at it for too long. The air around me started to hum, soft at first, then louder until it felt like the sound was inside my skull. I turned back toward the road and my RV headlights were on. Bright, blinding. Both beams cutting through the desert straight at me. Someone was sitting in the driver's seat. I ran. I don't even remember my legs moving, but I ran until my lungs burned, until my body felt like it was vibrating apart. When I reached the RV, the lights shut off instantly. The driver's seat was empty. Inside, everything looked the same, except for one thing. On the bed, right where I'd been sleeping, was a drawing. A child's crayon sketch, crumpled and smeared. It showed an RV in the middle of the desert, and beside it, a small figure with no face. Below it in shaky letters, "Don't leave me here again." The engine started on the first turn this time. I drove without looking back, without thinking, until dawn cracked over the horizon and the desert started to look human again. The air lightened, the road straightened, and for the first time all night, I felt like I'd escaped something, though I couldn't explain what. When I reached the next town, Eureka, I pulled into a diner just to breathe. The waitress poured me coffee and asked if I was okay. I must have looked pale, shaking. I told her where I'd camped, out near the rest stop on 50. Her face went blank. She said, "You shouldn't have gone out there." When I asked why, she told me about a family who'd vanished on that stretch back in the late 90s. Husband, wife, daughter, maybe 7 years old. They found the RV a year later, half sunk in the sand. No sign of the bodies. People said the desert took them. Others said they never left. I didn't finish my coffee. I didn't say a word. I just left a few bills on the counter and stepped back into the morning light, still trembling. Even now, I don't know what that voice was or whose handprint it was on the glass. Maybe there's something out there, something the desert keeps. All I know is this. When the air goes still in the desert, when the night breathes instead of the wind, don't wait. Don't listen. Don't look for answers. Just drive. And never, ever camp off Highway 50 in October, because some places remember you, even when you don't remember them. I'd been driving west for nearly 3 days when the map stopped matching the road. The desert has a way of making everything look the same. Bleached dirt, dry sage, and the distant shimmer of heat on the horizon. I was alone in my restored 1974 Volkswagen bus, a faded orange I'd named June. I'd spent months fixing her up, telling myself I'd take her somewhere no one else would go, somewhere I could breathe without the noise of other people, somewhere quiet enough to remember who I used to be. The sun was low that evening when I saw the sign, half buried in sand, the wood cracked and blistered from decades of wind. The paint was almost gone, but I could still make out the words, Silver Mesa RV Park. Vacancy. It wasn't on any of my maps, not even the old ones. I pulled over anyway, curious more than cautious. The desert stretched endlessly around me, and the thought of sleeping in an actual campground, even an abandoned one, felt safer than pulling off some nameless dirt road. The drive into the park was narrow, almost like the road didn't want to be found. My tires crunched over gravel and broken glass. The sign at the entrance hung crookedly on a rusted pole, and below it were rows of what had once been campsites. Slabs of concrete, twisted metal posts where hookups used to be. But what caught my eye were the RVs. There were at least 6 of them scattered through the park. Old sun-blasted shells, doors hanging open, windows spiderwebbed with cracks. A couple still had their awnings half extended, fluttering faintly in the breeze. They looked like fossils of people's vacations, left here and forgotten when time moved on. I parked June near the edge of the lot. The air felt different out here, drier, heavier somehow. When I stepped outside, I noticed how still everything was. No birds. No wind through the brush. Just that distant hum of the engine cooling and the faint creak of something shifting in the heat. I set up a small camp beside the bus, pulled out a folding chair, and opened a can of chili. I'd grown used to eating alone, but that night the silence felt heavier than usual. Every sound, the spoon tapping the metal rim, the faint rustle of fabric, echoed like it didn't belong. As the sun sank, the sky went from gold to deep indigo. I turned on a lantern and started jotting notes in my travel journal, the way I always did, where I stopped, what I saw, what I learned. But for the first time in months, I couldn't think of what to write. The stillness pressed on me like weight. I closed the notebook and looked toward the far end of the park, where one RV still had its curtains drawn. For a moment, I thought I saw them move. Just a flicker, like someone brushing past from the inside. I froze, waiting for it to happen again. But the curtain stayed still, and I told myself it was just the wind, or my eyes adjusting to the dark. Still, when I climbed into June that night, I locked the doors. The temperature dropped fast after sunset. Desert nights have a way of reminding you how small you are, the kind of cold that makes your bones ache, that silence that feels almost sentient. I lay in my sleeping bag, listening to the ticking of the metal cooling down, until I heard it. A knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. They came from outside the bus, from the driver's side door. At first, I thought it was the wind or something shifting in the heat. But then it came again, the same rhythm, 1, 2, 3. I held my breath. My mind tried to make sense of it, a coyote brushing against the van, a branch, but I'd parked in the open. There was nothing near me. I whispered to myself, "Don't open it." Another knock, softer this time. I grabbed the flashlight from the shelf and pointed it toward the window. Nothing. Just the pale reflection of my own face staring back at me. The knocks stopped, but I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Every sound, every shift of the wind made me jump. I kept replaying it in my head, that steady rhythm, like someone trying not to wake me but wanting me to know they were there. By morning, the desert looked harmless again. The sunlight erased everything strange from the night before, and part of me felt foolish for being so shaken. I made coffee, checked the van, and found nothing. No footprints, no marks, not even dust disturbed near the door. I told myself I'd just stay a little longer, maybe explore one of the RVs before heading out. I was too curious to leave without understanding what this place had been. The first one I checked had collapsed on one side, but inside there were old magazines scattered on the floor, RV Living, 1983, and a photo tacked to the wall of a family smiling beside a camper, the words, "Summer at Silver Mesa," written in faded pen. The air inside smelled like metal and rot. But what unsettled me most was how recent it all felt, like someone had just stepped out for a walk and never came back. In the next RV, I found something stranger, a stack of journals. The top one was water-stained, but a few entries were still legible. The handwriting belonged to someone named Marianne. Week 4. No one's been back since the power went out. Richard says we should stay put. He swears he saw lights over the ridge. I told him it's just the stars reflecting off the radio tower, but I don't know anymore. The wind sounds different lately. I flipped through the rest. The entries grew shorter, the handwriting sloppier. Then they stopped. The last page just said, "If you hear knocking, don't answer." I felt the first real chill of fear then, not the kind that makes you scream, but the kind that makes your stomach twist. because suddenly the world feels too quiet, too possible. I stepped outside, and the desert had changed again. The wind had picked up, carrying dust across the lot. From the corner of my eye, I thought I saw movement by one of the other RVs, a shadow slipping between the windows. I called out, "Hello?" No answer. But then, a soft metallic sound echoed, a door creaking open, and somewhere deep in the park, I heard it again. 3 slow knocks. I stood frozen in the doorway of that ruined RV, the wind brushing dust across my face. The sound had come from somewhere behind the row of trailers, near the far side of the park where the ground dipped toward the dry wash. It wasn't loud. If anything, it sounded careful, like whoever or whatever made it was testing how much noise they could get away with. I waited, straining my ears, but there was only silence again, just the low hiss of air through the desert brush. My flashlight beam shook as I swept it across the lot. Nothing moved. The other RVs stared back at me with their hollow windows, black and empty. I should have left right then. I knew that. But something about that last journal entry, "If you hear knocking, don't answer," felt like a warning that wasn't finished. And some stubborn, reckless part of me wanted to understand what had happened here to the people who once called this park their home. So I walked toward the sound. The ground was uneven, broken concrete giving way to sand and brittle weeds. I passed another RV, its door missing, its interior gutted by time. Inside, a child's shoe sat in a puddle of sand, a single small print leading nowhere. Then I reached the last row. There was a silver airstream at the end of it, its rounded shell catching what little light was left from the setting sun. The door was half open, creaking on a single hinge. I could smell rust and something else, an earthy, stale odor, like fabric that had absorbed too much rain decades ago. When I stepped inside, the air shifted, heavier. My light fell on a small table, 2 chairs, and a radio covered in dust. The dials were missing, but the antenna still stood upright. On the counter was a coffee mug, turned over, and a half-burned candle melted into a plate. And then, beside the small window, I saw the handprint. It was faint, almost transparent, but it was there, a single human hand pressed into the dust on the glass. What stopped me wasn't the size, but the shape. The fingers were long, too long, like someone had dragged them downward as they disappeared. I took a step back, my pulse hammering in my throat. Outside, the air had gone still again. I turned off my flashlight. I don't even know why. Maybe some part of me thought I'd see better without it, or maybe I just didn't want to be the only source of light. I stood there in the near dark, watching the window, listening. Then, faintly, from somewhere close by, closer than before, I heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't coming from the airstream this time. It was coming from June. I bolted outside, running across the gravel, the sound of my boots hitting the ground echoing too loud in the still air. My van sat at the far end of the lot, just as I had left it. But as I got closer, I saw movement in the driver's seat, something small and quick, ducking out of view. I shouted, "Hey!" But my voice sounded weak against the wind. The shape didn't move again. I reached the van and yanked open the passenger door, heart pounding, ready to swing the flashlight like a weapon. But there was no one inside, just my blanket on the floor, still warm, as if someone had just been sitting there. And then faintly, I smelled it, the same stale, earthy scent from the airstream. That was when I noticed something in the passenger seat, a piece of paper, torn from a notebook. On it, written in the same shaky handwriting from Marianne's journal, were 3 words, "They knock first." I drove out of there before the sun was gone. My headlights cut through the dust, the tires spitting gravel, but the road seemed longer this time. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone standing in the middle of the road behind me. But there was nothing, just the empty horizon swallowing the last of the light. When I finally reached the highway, I pulled over to catch my breath. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn off the ignition. I sat there, listening to the engine idle, trying to convince myself that what I'd seen, the handprint, the paper, the sounds, could all be explained. Maybe someone was still living out there. A squatter, someone who'd found the park and made it their own. That would explain the knocks, the handwriting. I repeated that idea until it felt almost believable. But then I thought of the journals, the dates, the way the ink had bled into the paper, the decades-old magazines. Whoever wrote that note had been gone for a very long time. I stayed on the highway that night, driving until my eyes blurred from fatigue. The stars above the desert looked sharper than usual, as if the air itself had thinned. When I finally pulled over at a rest stop, I slept with the lights on, the key still in the ignition. I woke to silence, the kind that comes before a storm. My watch said 5:43 a.m. The sky outside was a dull gray, the first light crawling up from the horizon. I made coffee, packed my bag, and reached for the ignition. That's when I noticed the dust on my driver's side window. 3 perfect handprints, each one larger than the last. For the next few days, I tried to forget about Silver Mesa. I kept driving west, deeper into Nevada, chasing old ghost towns the map still remembered. Beatty, Goldfield, Tonopah. But no matter where I stopped, I couldn't shake that feeling that I wasn't alone. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night, certain I'd heard someone knocking again. I'd look outside, flashlight trembling, but there was never anything there. Once, outside Goldfield, I heard footsteps circling the van. I thought maybe it was an animal until I heard the faint scrape of fingers on the door handle. After that, I started sleeping with a crowbar beside the bed. I told myself I'd go home soon, but I didn't. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe obsession. I wanted to know what had happened to that park, why it had been left to rot, why those people vanished. It wasn't until I stopped in a small diner outside of Ely that I finally got an answer, or at least a piece of one. The woman behind the counter was in her late 60s, her hair tied back, her voice calm and careful. When I mentioned Silver Mesa, she froze for just a second before setting down the coffee pot. "You shouldn't go near there," she said. I asked her why. She looked out the window toward the mountains before she answered. "They built that park on top of an old mining camp. Used to be called Silver Mesa Township. Whole town went dark after the collapse in '62. Folks said they heard the miners for weeks after, pounding from underground like they were still trying to get out." I felt the back of my neck prickle. "And the RV park?" She nodded slowly. "Opened 20 years later, closed after 3. People started hearing knocking on their doors at night. Some said it came from the ground." I asked her what happened to the people who stayed. She didn't answer right away. Then she whispered, "No one ever found them, just the trailers." That night, I camped far from town, out near a dry lake bed. The air was so still it felt like the world had stopped moving. I sat in my chair beside the bus, watching the horizon fade to black, and wondered if maybe the past doesn't disappear the way we think it does. Maybe it just waits, buried under dust and silence, until someone careless enough stumbles across it again. The desert around me was utterly quiet. Then, from somewhere out in the dark, I heard it. 3 slow knocks. I froze where I sat. The sound was distant, but clear. 3 heavy knocks that seemed to echo from the direction of the dry lake bed. It wasn't a random sound. It had rhythm, purpose. I turned off the lantern. The darkness swallowed me instantly. My eyes strained against the black, and I could just make out the outline of June, her curved body catching the faintest glint of starlight. Then it came again. Knock, 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 knock. This time, closer. The wind picked up, carrying grit and the faint smell of rain, even though the sky above was clean and cloudless. I grabbed the flashlight and clicked it on, sweeping the beam across the open desert. Nothing moved, just that endless, pale dust stretching into nowhere. "Who's out there?" I called. My voice cracked. No answer. My pulse pounded in my ears. I took a slow step toward the sound, feeling the ground shift slightly beneath my boots. The dirt here was loose, soft in a way that didn't feel right, like it had been disturbed recently. I crouched, shining the light down. There were depressions in the sand, uneven, not like footprints exactly, but like something heavy had pressed upward from underneath. That was when I heard the tapping. Not the three knocks this time. A faster, irregular rhythm, like something striking metal from far below. I turned back toward the van, every instinct screaming to get inside and drive. But just as I reached the door, I saw movement behind the windshield. A hand pressed against the inside of the glass. It wasn't mine. The fingers were pale and thin, the nails darkened, scraping faintly against the window as if testing it. The hand slowly slid downward, leaving a faint smear before vanishing into the shadows inside. I yanked open the door, the flashlight shaking so hard I could barely keep it steady. The cabin was empty. My sleeping bag still lay on the floor, my mug still half full of coffee on the dash, but the air inside felt colder, and that smell, that earthy old rain scent, was stronger now. Then, from behind me, the knocking started again. I spun around. The sound wasn't from the lake bed anymore. It was coming from the side of the van, low to the ground, right beneath where I was standing. I backed away, shining the light downward. The beam caught the edge of a half-buried metal hatch just behind the rear tire, something I hadn't noticed before. It looked old, the edges corroded and almost blended into the dirt. The knocking came again, this time from inside the hatch. I dropped the flashlight. It rolled, the beam cutting a narrow line across the ground. The sound beneath me went still. Then a voice, hoarse, whispering too close, drifted up through the cracks in the metal. "Help me!" I stumbled back, heart racing, nearly tripping over the folding chair. The voice came again, softer this time. "Please, help me!" Everything rational in me screamed, "Run!" But something deeper, some stubborn empathy I didn't know how to turn off, rooted me there. Because what if it was real? What if someone really was trapped? I crouched beside the hatch, my fingers brushing the cold metal. "Who's down there?" I whispered. No answer. I pulled harder. The hatch didn't budge. Sand had packed itself tight around the edges. I tried again, using the crowbar I kept under the passenger seat. The metal shrieked as it lifted just enough to let a thin breath of air escape, a breath that smelled like rot and rain-soaked dust. I shone the light into the gap. For a second, I saw nothing, just darkness shifting slightly like mist. Then something moved. A face. Not whole, just the impression of one, half-formed in the dark, eyes reflecting light like glass marbles. It was looking straight up at me, mouth slightly open, whispering without sound. The hatch slammed shut. I staggered back, the crowbar falling from my hand. My light flickered and went out. The knocking resumed, furious now, louder, closer. It wasn't from the hatch anymore. It was from everywhere. From the van's frame, the ground beneath me, even the air seemed to vibrate with it. I bolted into June, slammed the door, and turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. Gravel spat from the tires as I tore down the dirt track, headlights cutting through the dust storm building behind me. In the mirror, the lake bed was barely visible, but just before it disappeared into darkness, I saw them. Shapes, faint and gray, standing in a loose circle where I'd been camped. Still. Watching. I drove until dawn, not stopping until the desert gave way to low hills and pale scrub. When I finally pulled over, I could still feel the vibration of the knocks in my chest. Every sound the van made felt wrong, the rattle of tools, the squeak of the suspension, all of it mimicking that rhythm. I told myself I was done, that I'd go home, sell the van, forget this trip ever happened. But the strange thing about fear is how it burrows into curiosity. You want to turn away, but you also want to understand. You need it to make sense before you can let it go. A week later, I was in a library in Bishop, California, pretending I wasn't looking for answers. I was flipping through local archives, half out of habit, when I found a microfilm article from 1985. Mysterious evacuation at Silver Mesa RV Park, 6 missing. The photo showed the same cracked sign I'd seen half buried in sand. The article described power failures, strange vibrations in the ground, and reports of nocturnal knocking noises heard by residents in the days before the evacuation. Authorities had investigated sinkholes and methane leaks, but nothing conclusive was found. One line near the bottom caught my eye. Witnesses claim the sounds resembled miners' tools striking from beneath the earth. I sat there, staring at those words, my throat dry. The librarian must have noticed because she came over quietly and asked if I was researching local hauntings. I told her I wasn't sure what I was doing. She nodded like she'd heard that before. "That place still calls to people," she said softly. "Every few years someone goes looking. Not everyone comes back." I asked her what she meant. "They follow the knocking," she said, "and they think it's asking for help." That night, I parked June in a rest stop outside Lone Pine. The stars were blinding, the kind of night sky that looks infinite and alive. I should have felt small. Instead, I felt watched. I tried to sleep, but I kept hearing the faint ticking of metal somewhere deep inside the van's frame. It wasn't rhythmic this time, more like something trying to the right beat. I finally sat up, turned on the lantern, and whispered to the empty air, "I'm not answering." The van went still. For a moment, I thought maybe that was it. Maybe I'd finally left it behind in the desert. But then, from under the floorboard came one soft, final knock. Just one. And then silence. I don't go near abandoned parks anymore. I still drive, still camp, still chase the quiet corners of the map, but never anywhere that isn't marked. I've learned that the land remembers everything we build on it, every story we bury, every mistake we pretend time will erase. Sometimes, when the wind is right, I think I can still hear the faint echo of those knocks, carried across miles of sand and silence. It doesn't scare me anymore. It just reminds me that some places aren't meant to be found twice. It's been months since that night in the desert. I've crossed a dozen state lines, slept in forests, by rivers, under stormy skies, and in the kind of quiet you can only find when you're miles from anyone. I still drive June, though the paint is duller now, the corners of her frame showing rust like veins beneath old skin. I've thought a lot about that place. Silver Mesa, the way the sand seemed to breathe, the way the knocking felt less like a haunting and more like a heartbeat I wasn't supposed to hear. Sometimes, when I pass a row of empty RV lots or a shuttered gas station with grass growing through the pavement, I wonder if maybe it's all connected. That slow decay that creeps into everything we abandon. The things we build to escape life eventually get claimed by it again. I've realized something out there. Fear isn't always the enemy. Sometimes it's the messenger. It shows you the edge of what you understand and dares you to look past it. That night, in the middle of the desert, I felt more alive than I had in years, not because I was brave, but because I finally understood how fragile all this is. The van, the road, the noise we fill our lives with so we don't have to listen to the silence underneath. Maybe that's what the knocking was trying to say, that there are parts of ourselves buried deep, things we've silenced, forgotten, paved over, and sometimes in the stillest places, they start calling back. When you travel long enough, you start to see the patterns. Every abandoned campground is a story half finished. Every faded sign once guided someone home. Every ghost town was built by hands that believed they were building forever. But nothing lasts forever. Not the road, not the fear, not even us. I think that's why I keep driving, because somewhere between the fear and the quiet, between the headlights and the dark, there's something honest, something that doesn't lie. The desert stripped me bare that night. It showed me that the past doesn't stay buried just because we stop looking. It waits, patiently, until someone like me comes along, too curious, too restless, too lonely to leave well enough alone. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's what the road is really for, not to escape the ghosts, but to meet them, to understand what they're trying to tell us before they fade for good. When I sleep in June now, I still hear things sometimes. The frame creaks, the metal shifts with the cold. Sometimes it sounds like tapping, but I don't flinch anymore. I just listen, because fear, I've learned, isn't always there to stop you. Sometimes it's there to keep you awake. And maybe that's the whole lesson of the road, that the things we fear the most aren't trying to hurt us. They're trying to remind us we're still here, still breathing, still searching, still alive in a world that's forgetting what that even means. So if you ever find yourself out there, alone, miles from anywhere, parked beside the skeleton of a place that time forgot, and you hear something knock beneath the silence, don't panic, don't run, just listen. Because sometimes the desert isn't asking you to save anyone. Sometimes it's just asking if you still remember how to feel.